Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Change Dude podcast. I'm your host, Saeed Rafay, and today we are here to explore a pivotal moment in Europe's startup and scale-up history. Back in episode 46, we discussed how Europe was asserting itself in the digital age. Now I want to take a deeper dive. Over the last few months, something extraordinary has happened. Policy, passion, and pragmatism converged in a strategy that could reshape Europe's innovation trajectory. On May 28, 2025, the European Commission unveiled Choose Europe to Start and Scale, a strategic package aimed at transforming the EU into a global startup powerhouse. But this moment isn't happening in a vacuum. It arrives after decades of bright ideas, deep research, fragmented markets, and missed scale-up opportunities. So in today's episode, I will walk you through three phases. First, the backdrop, where Europe has come from. Second, the strategy itself, what it says and why it matters. And third, the reflection, what it could mean, where it might fall short, and what you can do about it. Our narrative is grounded in official EU material, sifted analysis, EU startups coverage, and trusted reporting outlets like Reuters, free of conspiracy, ideology, or blame. My goal is to offer clarity, insight, and the kind of context founders, operators, and builders need to make sense of an ecosystem in flux. So let's begin by rewinding back before the headlines. Let's begin by act number 1, the backdrop. Imagine Europe 5 or 10 years ago. Laboratories and research institutes thrived across the continent. Universities generated groundbreaking innovation in artificial intelligence, biotech, clean tech, aerospace, and more. Yet when it came to turning innovation into globally scaled businesses, Europe often fell short. The European Commission has repeatedly highlighted this gap. While Europe produces some of the world's brightest scientists and engineers, many of its startups end up seeking venture capital and expanding opportunities outside Europe. In 2025, only around 8% of global scale-ups were based in the EU, compared with 60% in North America. That's a stark discrepancy, and one the Commission is seeking to change. This gap isn't just statistical, it shapes careers, talent flows, wealth creation, social trust, and the digital future Europe inherits. Research-driven startups may be born in Berlin or Barcelona, but more often than not, they reach scale in Boston or Palo Alto. Why is that? Fragmentation stands out as the central culprit. Not merely a single market, the EU remains a tapestry of national laws, languages, regulatory frameworks, funding environments, tax rates, insolvency norms, and more. A startup may be built in Berlin, but scaling it in Milan means digging through snarled legal text, rewriting contracts, relocating payroll, issuing separate stock options, all while facing different administrative burdens, cultural conventions, and bureaucratic paths. And even if they succeed, they are still often left behind in late-stage funding landscapes. Now, the second part we are going to cover in the backdrop is the first valley of death. This is the gap between research and market readiness. European hospital labs, energy test beds, climate innovators, deep tech ideas all generate IP. But fewer make the jump to commercialization. Technology transfer offices, IP licensing channels, and institutional incentives are improving, but median conversion rates from patent to product remain low. This is where initiatives like the European Innovation Council, launched in 2018, and National Tech Bridges began. These programs provided grants, equity support, and pitch training. They began to inject optimism, but full-scale commercialization remained uneven. Next comes second valley of death, from startup to scale-up. Once a company exits lab territory, enters the fast growth track, raises Series A and proves product market fit, it confronts the second valley of death. That's where fragmentation truly hurts. Compared to US counterparts, European startups face longer, costlier rounds at Series B and beyond. The European Investment Bank reported that only about 50% of European seed-funded startups make it to Series C, compared to far higher rates in America. Meanwhile, Europe's mid-stage funding ecosystem remains thin. Pension funds hold massive capital, but much remains parked in local bonds and real estate portfolios. Capital flow is regional, local, and cautious, even for companies with global potential. At the same time, competition for talent intensifies. Compensation and equity models struggle under regional tax divergences. Labor laws make moving fast tricky, and enthusiastic developers may migrate to places where compensation is higher and stability seems greater. At the same time, culture matters. Founders grapple with perfectionism, risk aversion, second-year paralysis. In the US, pivoting is part of the DNA. In Europe, the stigma of failure lingers more heavily. In some situations, regulation, slow iteration, expectations weigh founders down. This all culminates in traumatic moments where founders relocate their headquarters, redomicile investors, or simply abandon EU planning altogether. So why it matters now? By 2025, European voices began to coalesce around the belief that the cycle must end, or at least bend. Reports from EU Startup Summit and even top EU Commission bodies acknowledged the 2016 Startup and Scale-up initiative had set the logic but lacked follow-through. The structural changes, they argued, needs more than slogans. It needs orders of magnitude more ambition, clarity, and momentum. That brings us to the strategy that dropped in the month of May 2025. Now let's start with covering an overview of Choose Europe to Start and Scale strategy. On May 28, 2025, the Commission launched its new Startup and Scale-up strategy. This strategy pivots around 5 interlocking pillars: regulation, finance, market access, talent, and infrastructure. Let's start with the first pillar: innovation-friendly regulation. Perhaps the most structural and potentially revolutionary element is the so-called 28th regime. If implemented, this regime would create a common legal framework across several EU member states for corporate setup, insolvency rules, equity systems like stock options, registration, administration, and more. Imagine launching anywhere in Europe with a common setup, tax declaration, and equity system. That would remove months of legal and administrative ambiguity for companies hiring across multiple countries. It's a step toward European startup incorporation as a service. The draft law is expected in early 2026, and if adopted by 2027, it could be a true milestone. Alongside the regime comes digital tools. The European Business Wallet, the European Innovation Act, and the formalization of regulatory sandboxes allowing startups to test without full compliance in pilot settings. Second pillar is better finance through Scale-up Europe Fund. No strategy is complete without money. The Commission aims to close the late-stage funding gap with the Scale-up Europe Fund, a public-private vehicle expected to exceed 10 billion euros. Unlike grants or early-stage EIC programs, this fund will specifically target expansion-stage companies, Series B through pre-IPO. It will be managed privately and co-funded by institutional investors via the Savings and Investment Union framework. This responds directly to the reality that EU startups rarely reach middle-stage growth due to insufficient local capital and an ingrained preference among private savings for bonds, properties, and low-risk instruments. Third pillar, market acceleration infrastructure. Europe's third pillar addresses commercialization, how to move from prototype to global, lab to unicorn hubs, standardized tech transfer, procurement, innovation, and ecosystem density. These hubs intend to be regional focal points: universities, research labs, corporate investors, and startups sharing legal and administrative frameworks, IP standardization, and pipeline access into public and corporate procurements. It's a way to engineering scale through concentrated density. without replicating Silicon Valley-style clusters, but through interoperability and meaningful links across contexts. Fourth pillar is talent magnetism and mobility. Talent matters most. To attract and retain high-skilled founders and team members, the Commission proposes fast-track visas for entrepreneurs, blue carpet-style mobility, and programs and tax reforms on stock options. These policies aim to align employment incentives, reduce friction in hiring across borders, and remove penal taxation from startup equity, making Europe truly competitive in global talent markets. Pillar number 5 is infrastructure access. Finally, the strategy aims to make European innovation infrastructure labs, pilot plants, research services, HPC clusters consistently accessible through a charter of access, protocols for usage across regions, and the business wallet digital identity system. This ensures the startups can tap into high-end public resources quickly and predictably, critical for deep tech sectors like artificial intelligence, biotech, advanced materials, and semiconductors. Now let's move to reflection and evaluation. Reading this strategy, one is impressed by its comprehensiveness. Europe has rarely seen such coordinated thinking across regulation, funding, market, talent, and infrastructure. Unlike earlier initiatives, this strategy signals urgency. Legislative proposals by early 2026, funding launches in 2026, scoreboards and implementation reviews by 2027. But implementation is challenging by definition. The 28th regime requires legislative alignment across 27 countries. The fund requires appetite from institutional investors. Hubs require corporate academic coordination. Will they move fast enough? On top of execution risk are cultural realities. European founders continue to wrestle with perfectionism, risk aversion, second chance stigma. The strategy acknowledges cultural inertia, but shifting mindsets requires more than reallocating funds or rewriting legal frameworks. Will entrepreneurs feel empowered to fail fast, pivot freely, and scale ambitiously? Will investors embrace risk and move deeper into mid-stage European opportunities? Another dimension is distribution. This strategy might privilege core innovation hubs, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, Stockholm, over smaller ecosystems. If funding, procurement, and infrastructure access are disproportionately clustered, less developed regions risk being left out. Therefore, a pan-EU approach has to be coupled with outreach to underserved regions. For the listeners, let's discuss what it means for you. If you are an EU-based founder, investor, or ecosystem leader, here are some ways to engage with this moment. First, follow the legal timeline. Watch the 28th regime proposals in early 2026. Align your hiring and equity models with the changes. If your firm operates cross-border, get visibility early. Second, when the Scale Up Europe Fund launches, be ready. Build relationships with EIC channels. Consider timing your funding roadmap to align with EU disbursements. Reach out to national institution investors who may participate through the Savings and Investment Union framework. Third, connect to regional hub plans. If you are in a city with local universities or test beds, explore how lab to unicorn hubs could feature you. These are opportunities for pilot procurement, exposure, shared infrastructure. Fourth, reflect on your talent and culture. If stock options come under a single regime, you could reshape your package. Have candid conversations about failure, iteration, and scaling. Cultural evolution matters as much as policy. Finally, engage in the ecosystem conversation. Brussels want this plan to succeed. Organize, lobby, vote. Participate in forums, reach out via LinkedIn, Twitter, startup associations, elevation channels. If builders don't hold the system accountable, implementation can stall. Let's cover up today's episode. We have traveled from Europe's past through its present into an emerging future. The EU's new strategy offers promise. A unified legal regime 28th, defunding for late-stage startups, a scale-up fund, market acceleration through hubs, talent magnetism via mobility, and shared infrastructure via a charter. But the outcome hinges on three factors: execution, culture, inclusivity. Will the Commission coordinate across nations and sectors? Will founders embrace velocity without perfection? Will innovation benefit across the EU? My perspective is hopeful. Europe has European strengths, stability, research excellence, social purpose, but it also needs courage, coordination, and cultural daring. This strategy doesn't copy Silicon Valley. It frames its own route, long-termist, tech-enabled, socially rooted. If you are building in the EU, now is the time to lean in. Be informed, be intentional, be vocal, be ready. Let me know where you stand, drop me a message, share your experiences, good or bad. This story is not just a policy memo, it's a living ecosystem shared by people, ideas, ambition, courage. Let the strategy be the catalyst, not the conclusion. If you found value in today's deep dive, please subscribe, share with a fellow founder or ecosystem ally. In our next episode, we will return to AI innovation, what's next in the age of generative and agentic intelligence. I'm your host, Saeed Rafay, from another episode of the Change Dude podcast. Stay curious and keep changing the game. Until next time.